Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're continuing our conversation on enmeshment, and I'm going to give you all some steps that you can take to start working through the process of overcoming enmeshment. So let's get started. So remembering that this process is long, it takes time, it takes consistent practice over the years. It's something that I still work on personally, and I've been in the process of working through my family enmeshment for the past 12 years. So it's something that takes practice. So remembering that there's no quick solution, self-differentiation, which is the process that we use to sort of overcome and outgrow enmeshment over time. It's actually a lifelong process of just becoming more and more ourselves, more and more authentic, more and more mature, specifically within the context of our relationship systems. So relationship systems can be your family of origin, it can be your family of procreation or your family of choice, such as, which includes your spouse and your children. It could also be relationship systems that you're a part of outside of the family context, maybe an organization that you work for, a team you lead, maybe your social group, a community of faith, for example, that you participate in. Any system of people, of human beings that relate to each other. As we show up in those relationship systems, we're going to bring the patterns, the relational patterns that we learned growing up in our family, and then we will recreate those dynamics in our everyday lives. So the more self-differentiation work we do, which is to say looking at our family of origin, learning the enmeshment patterns, working to get outside of those enmeshment patterns, the more we do that work, the more we're going to bring a more mature and authentic and boundaried and well-defined self out into the world, into other relationship systems that we participate in, and the more successful we're going to be in those relationships as well. So first and foremost, in the self-differentiation process, when we're overcoming enmeshment, is you have to nurture your relationship with yourself. When we grow up in enmeshed family systems, we learn to be defined by others. We learn to live in a way that is going to get the approval of others, that's going to meet the expectations of others, that's going to manage the emotional reactions of others, and we lose a sense of who we actually are. We lose touch with our own emotions, with our own needs, with our own desires, with our own thoughts. Our life choices are based on what will please others or what will protect from others having a reaction to us or disapproving of our choices. So when we start self-differentiation work, we have to start nurturing that relationship with ourselves. We have to start getting to know ourselves. We have to start thinking about, what would I choose to do in my life if the opinions and reactions of others did not matter? And this starts with nurturing our relationship with ourselves, spending time alone, spending time with our own thoughts, with our own emotions, maybe journaling to get to know ourselves better, and understanding what it is that we dream of for our future, what it is that we fear, what are the things within ourselves that we want to work on or that are yearning to be expressed out in the world. So that is step one. The second step is to start observing and stop absorbing. Now I want to just make a quick note. These steps are not necessarily in chronological order. You're going to be working on these different things at the same time, many times. And then maybe sometimes one particular step is going to take more of a front seat at a certain stage of the process. And then maybe at a later stage of the process, another one is one that you focus on more. So just remembering these are kind of asynchronous, and they're not linear. It's not a linear process, so understanding that. But going back to it, number two is to start observing and stop absorbing. What does this mean? Well, when we grow up in enmeshed family systems, we learn to absorb everybody else's stuff. Their emotional field becomes ours as well. We're always absorbing the anxiety, the negativity, the problems, the tension of those around us, specifically within our family system, since they have such an emotional impact on us. They're our closest emotional attachment, so they have a huge emotional impact on us. And oftentimes, enmeshed family systems are very anxious systems. There's a lot of systems anxiety that kind of passes around from person to person like an electrical current. And we absorb a lot of that, and it makes us reactive as well. And then we continue participating in that crazy anxious dynamic. So one of the things that you have to work on in the self-differentiation process is to get out of that systems anxiety, step outside of it temporarily. And you can do that by working on not absorbing it. So first you have to notice that it's even happening, which is the observation part. You have to kind of like take a bird's eye view on your family system, as well as your role within your family system. Pay attention to how you are interacting with the different members of the family. Pay attention to how you respond, how your body feels when your family starts to get a little anxious or one person starts to maybe escalate the tension. Pay attention to what happens to you. Start observing how you absorb that anxiety and start working to not absorb it. So that can mean setting a boundary with yourself. It could mean setting, which if you set a boundary with yourself, it's a little bit more implicit. You don't have to communicate it necessarily to anyone else. You're just telling yourself to, you know what, I'm not going to take this on right now. This is not mine, this is theirs. I'm not going to absorb it. Sometimes that may mean that you have to set an explicit boundary with others. You may have to tell, Mom, this is yours, this is not mine, I'm not going to take it on. I'm not going to absorb it. And this is sort of starting to learn the process of not taking on the problems and the emotions and the anxieties of everyone else. Now, this doesn't mean that you won't sometimes take it on. Sometimes it's appropriate to do so. This is a part of being empathetic creatures as human beings. We're social beings. We have the capacity for empathy, which is to say we feel what others feel. Emotional contagion is kind of a feature of our species. And this ability to feel what others are feeling is what makes us care for others and reach out to help them and support each other in our growth and our development and our well-being and our survival. However, if you're doing this too much, it can just become completely overwhelming and detrimental to your well-being and to your own personal growth and development in your life. So part of this process is also learning to become more conscious so that you can choose when you take it on and when you don't. When you're living in a passive and automatic state, you're taking on people's anxiety without even noticing it. It's just, you're absorbing it and you're reacting constantly. So you live in this automatic reactive state. So part of this step is learning to become more in control of the anxiety that you absorb and don't absorb in the context of the relationship systems in your life. Okay, so number 3, which is related to this one, is you're going to have to practice setting boundaries. So when we grow up in enmeshed family systems, we normally don't get any practice with setting boundaries. Boundaries aren't modeled for us. Our parents don't practice them. Our siblings don't practice them. When we set boundaries, people react. They take it as a sign of rejection. They don't understand it as a sign of a healthy relationship pattern. So we grow up learning to, one, not ever set our own boundaries, not feel safe setting boundaries, and also not understanding that it's healthy for other people to set boundaries with us. So part of the self-differentiation process is learning, where you end, where the other begins. Learning what your emotional limits are, learning when someone has gone too far with you, and when to pull back, when to set some limits, when to communicate to others that they've gone too far. Also learning how to manage your own time and energy, learning to say no sometimes. If someone asks you for help with something, if someone starts to dump their problems on you, if someone wants you to come to an event that you don't really feel like you have the emotional capacity for, it's learning to say no, and again, become in charge and in control of your own emotional energy by setting boundaries. Now, people are going to react. If you come from an enmeshed family system, They don't understand boundaries. They take boundaries as a sign of rejection, and when you start setting boundaries, they're going to react because they don't understand. That's okay, that's normal. You have to continue pushing through, and you have to ingrain the pattern. It's like learning a new skill set. You have to keep practicing it, enforcing it over and over and over, and then eventually people start to get used to your new way of being. But setting boundaries is essential for the self-differentiation process. It's essential for overcoming enmeshment. Okay, so number 4, as you see, these kind of are all gonna connect with each other, is you have to push through the barriers. There are going to be so many points of the process of self-differentiation that feel uncomfortable. It sounds, glorious. It sounds like, oh, I want to be self-differentiated. Everybody wants to be more self-differentiated. But what people, my clients, and honestly myself, don't recognize is that along the way, it gets really uncomfortable. Sometimes it gets lonely. People will misunderstand us. People will push back. They will react to our new way of being. They will try to guilt trip us and use all sorts of other manipulation tactics to get us to stop changing in this way, because we are shaking up the system when we do this. Remember, the system functions as a unit, and it requires that the family system functions as a unit, and it requires that every family member continues to play the same role and have the same patterns that they've always played in order to maintain that system stability, in order for things to remain as they always have and therefore remain comfortable. As you start to change yourself and you start to change your patterns and you stop playing the role that you've always played, it shakes up the system, and other people may not be so happy with the changes that are happening. They may want things to stay the same. They may be comfortable. It may be convenient. The way things currently are may be convenient for them, and in you changing, it takes them out of their comfort and it makes it inconvenient for them. So they are going to push back, and you have to be prepared for this. And you have to stick through it. You have to push through that discomfort and tolerate the disapproval, the rejection, the pushback, the manipulation, the guilt that people are inevitably, your family members, that is to say, are inevitably going to give you as you start to change. So it is absolutely necessary in the self-differentiation process to have emotional stamina. You have to stick with those difficult emotions that are a natural part of the growth process as you're overcoming enmeshment. And then lastly, this last one is key, and one that I've struggled with a lot throughout my journey, and I know many of my clients have struggled with throughout the journey. But it's to accept your family where they are and not to try to change them or to get them to come along on the self-differentiation journey. And this one is kind of ironic because part of the enmeshment is that we want others to approve of what we're doing. We want them to understand what we're doing. We want them to come along with us. We want them to think like us. And also, we want to know that we are not causing negative emotions in other people. That's part of the enmeshment. And when our family members start to react and feel uncomfortable with the differentiation process that we're doing, we're going to start feeling that too. And as a way to try to protect that, we're going to want to convince them that they should be doing this work too. And we're going to want to educate them about the psychology of all of this. And we're going to want to tell them that they should go to therapy and that they need to be setting this boundary, and that we're going to want to over-explain ourselves, and we're going to want them to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And the truth is that we can't do that. It is not our role to get our family members to change. That itself is enmeshment. It is only our role to learn to take care of ourselves and to change ourselves. That is self-differentiation. Now, the side effect of you changing and shaking up the system is that there may be others who eventually come along, and you end up serving as a role model, but not because you're telling them to change, not because you're convincing them or explaining yourself and making them understand why differentiation is important, but rather because you are doing differentiation. So you have to be the change that you wish to see in your family system. You have to change yourself and do the journey the work is on self. The focus is on self, and you have to allow your family members to be wherever they are at in their journey. Now, if there's an intrinsic desire that comes from within them to change, and they come to you to ask you about what you're doing and why, that's a different story. If they're asking you for advice, that's a different story. But it's actually enmeshment and crossing of boundaries to try to get your family member to change or do something different. It's not your job to try to get them to do anything. The desire to change has to come from within them, if it ever does, and it may never. They may just want to remain comfortable in doing things the way that they are doing things, and that's okay. You have to allow that. That is part of the self-differentiation process, is to allow others to do their journey however they want to do their journey. And it's crossing of boundaries, psychological and emotional and even spiritual boundaries, to try to control the growth trajectory of another person. That's not your role. It's your role to control your own, to take responsibility for your own growth journey. And so it's going to be key in your self-differentiation process as you're overcoming enmeshment to just focus on self and allow your family members to be wherever they're at, accept them. If they're not healing in the way that you wish they were healing, you're going to have to learn acceptance. And to not have to also explain yourself. You do not have to explain yourself. People do not need to approve of your self-differentiation journey. They do not need to understand and accept your boundaries. You need to learn how to set and accept and validate your own boundaries and your own journey. Mom may never understand the boundary you're setting. Dad may never understand the fact that you want to spend less time with them. They may never. And it's not your role to explain that to them. It's your role to explain that to yourself and to validate yourself and to continue moving forward based on that thoughtful experience of the inner guidance system that you have and that you will cultivate by nurturing your relationship with yourself. All right, everyone, there are some of my tips on working through the enmeshment in your family system by doing self-differentiation work. If you have questions, remember that I do a private monthly Q&A every month, so be sure to subscribe below. I'll leave the link in the description, and then you can submit your question to me and I will answer it personally. And whatever other questions you have also, you can leave them in the comments below. I also do read those, and then every once in a while pick a popular question to answer it here on the channel. So don't be afraid to leave your comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time here on my channel.